Hey, did we hear back about our visas yet?
Yeah, Denmark sent us 20 krona and told us to flip a coin. It's heads, we get to stay. Woohoo! Okay, jokes aside.
Is that why there's always change in the couch?
Yes. And sometimes as a foreigner living in Denmark, it always seems this way. Like every other Danish government has restricted the rules around immigration more and more than the last. And some rules have even been implemented retroactively, which results in additional residency requirements for foreigners that are already living and working in Denmark legally.
Now, if you don't closely follow immigration to Denmark as a trending news topic, you may have missed the recent news of some British folks that are being deported from Denmark. They were informed that they had to or have to leave Denmark because they failed to register into the system of non-EU visa holders in Denmark, something we're both a part of.
Yeah, and in this video, we're going to look at a few examples of how Denmark's no exception take on non-EU immigration has been raising some eyebrows inside and outside of the EU.
So one of the first cases that we've learned about in the news is a man by the name of Phil Russell who moved from the UK to Denmark in October 2020. He claims that he wasn't aware of a need to register with the Danish immigration office known as SIRI before December 31st, 2021. He only learned this when applying for a new job in early January 2022 when the company asked for his residence card. He immediately went to submit his application on the 4th of January, 4 days late. In May of 2020, he received notice that his application was rejected because he submitted it late.
So naturally, he appealed this decision, saying that it was a minor error. But then in early November of 2022, he was notified that his appeal was rejected and that he must leave Denmark by early December. This means he needs to return to the UK, leaving his job in financial services and his Danish fiancée.
There's a similar story that made the news for a man by the name of William Hill. He submitted his application 3 weeks late and had it rejected for the same reason, appealed the rejection, and lost on the appeal as well. Hill was also told he had to leave in early December 2022, meaning he'll have to leave his job in digital security and his Danish fiancée, whom he had planned to marry in January of 2023.
So Danish politicians are already starting to weigh in on the matter, and Mads Fuglede, a member of the Folketing from the party Venstre, has stated that he believes all of these deportations of British people should stop, as they're not in the spirit of the actual Brexit withdrawal agreement that got us here. However, the situation is complicated because the recent Danish elections and the continued negotiations to form a government mean that while SIRI, the Danish Immigration Office, has civil leadership, there's no minister in charge of immigration for the whole country. That can take political decisions or interpret this policy. So even with an influential politician speaking out against the deportations, not much can be done immediately, and as you may imagine, time is of the essence here.
Now, SIRI has publicly responded by saying that there were 3 letters sent to all British citizens living in Denmark, reminding them of the need to apply for a new residence permit. There were also extensive information campaigns for the estimated 19,000 British citizens living in Denmark to advertise this new policy. They also noted that in the case of late applications, they do consider each case individually to assess if there are reasonable grounds for the applicant having missed the deadline. SIRI also noted that this assessment includes looking at how long the applicant has been living in Denmark, what are their ties to the community and the labor market, and any impacts them leaving Denmark may have on dependents or other family members.
So both Russell and Hill shared the same sentiment. To them, SIRI didn't consider any of this to be enough in their actual appeals. Russell has made it known that he even went to the SIRI offices for an in-person meeting and asked if everything was in order, to which he was told, no, everything's okay. Hill echoed this frustration, saying that beyond me being in a coma and not being aware, there seemed to not be any way around this, indicating that SIRI isn't accepting "I wasn't aware" as a legitimate excuse for missing the deadline. Hill said that as part of his appeal, he submitted significant personal information, including photographs, tons of information about the relationship that he has with his Danish fiancée, and how well he's integrated into Danish society. But in the end, after filling out all of that information and sending so much supporting documents, it didn't seem to matter. From his side, the only thing that mattered was that he missed a deadline.
Yeah, and the member of Folketing, Mads Fuglede, seems to also echo this is as much a political issue as a technical one. He believes that this kind of hard line is not in the spirit and understanding when the law was passed, post-Brexit. The intent was to ensure that British citizens in Denmark had an easy way to stay, not to force them out. He additionally told the Danish newspaper Politiken that he found that SIRI's communication efforts to British citizens in Denmark were unsatisfactory in his eyes and not working. Anecdotally, we know that there was some confusion from others around Denmark about their needs to apply for the new permit, given specific personal situations they may have.
Right, and it's estimated that only 290 British citizens are in similar situations where they applied too late, and now they're standing at risk of being deported in the coming weeks. Looking around the rest of the EU, it seems that Denmark is taking a particularly hard line more than other countries.
Yeah, so France had a deadline for Brits to apply like Denmark, but they've subsequently postponed this deadline several times because they've had a high demand, and they still estimate that thousands of British citizens living in France have not yet applied.
Spain has been more lenient with the application delays, and the biggest issues have been for people who were working in Spain but not formally registered with the Spanish authorities before Brexit occurred.
Yeah, Italy also does not have a specific application for post-Brexit residence cards, and in fact, they only require that when necessary, people just prove that they were legally in Italy prior to Brexit, and they're considered okay.
And Germany has what I personally think is probably the easiest and smartest solution. They automatically granted residence status to those who were living in the country of Germany at the time of Brexit, although the British Embassy does recommend that registration be performed as a precaution.
Now, across the Öresund, Sweden also had a deadline at the end of 2021 like Denmark, but they noted as well that they will accept late applications and assess their validity on an individual basis. There's also in the media news about a similar British man who had been living in Sweden for more than a decade, and he actually only discovered his error in not registering with Sweden when he tried to re-enter after a visit to Scotland to see his mother. He was actually not allowed through passport control in the airport in Sweden, and then was forced to book a flight back to Scotland, with police even escorting him back to the gate. Then back in Scotland, he had to work with Swedish authorities to get a temporary dispensation so he could come back to Sweden, where he's been working as a chef and actually has 2 children living there as well.
So obviously there are a lot of arguments on both sides as to whether or not it's justified to deport these British citizens. On one hand, this does seem extremely harsh to deport people that have been here legally but miss what amounts to an administrative deadline, especially during an era where these offices weren't even open the entire year of 2021. Nearly all Danish political parties acknowledge a labor shortage in the country of Denmark that can only be made up with immigration, or they're going to have to risk a reduction in services. Martin Damm, who's the leader of the National Association of Municipalities, says that it's estimated that 44,000 workers are needed by 2030 in order to maintain the current public services, such as elder care. The private sector agrees too, with Danish industry stating that if it were possible today, they would immediately hire 38,000 additional workers to fill the existing labor gap. With labor gaps like this, deporting high-skilled workers that already have jobs in Denmark and are integrated in Danish society and already live here makes zero sense to me. What do you gain besides bad press that puts off other foreign talent and impacts the Danish businesses that may want to hire them?
Now, on the other hand, rules are rules, and it's hard to imagine that anybody who wasn't living under a rock didn't know that Brexit was happening and there would be consequences if you're a British citizen. And have to say, as immigrants in any country, you have to be aware of what's needed for you to stay. And changes happen. If you're affected by them, it's binary. We're members of multiple Facebook groups about immigration in Denmark, so we can keep up to date on what's going on here. And we've actually had some legal support to make sure that our situation is secure as our situation has changed in Denmark.
Okay, so the only real argument, though, is that rules are rules, and that is so short-sighted, in my opinion. It's really difficult when human stories face off against government bureaucracy, and this is one of those cases. So much of Brexit was about the abstract concepts of freedom and the minutiae of bullshit issues like fishing rights, and while the United Kingdom ignored that human element that was really going to be the true impact of Brexit, Denmark can't double down on that mistake, and it looks like they're prepared to do just that. Immigration has always been a major issue in Danish politics and the most recent elections, but if you really want to understand how those elections work and get to know how they compare to the American elections, you need to watch this video right here. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments on this particular issue, and as always, thanks for watching, everybody.
Hi.